The first coalition that threatened to destroy the young French Republic was crushed. Now only Great Britain continued the war against France. All these victories over the coalitionists infatuated the members of the Directory, and they've now decided that everything is within their reach. Already a couple of months after the ratification of the Treaty of Campo Formio, the French soldiers under the command of General Brune invaded Switzerland and announced the creation of the Helvetic Republic. Also, the Directory again sent troops against Pope Pius VI. A reason for that was the assassination in Rome of the French General Dufaux, who was there on a diplomatic mission. As a result, the soldiers, commanded by General Berthier, took the Eternal City, and on February 15, 1798, an excited crowd gathered at the capital, announced the abolition of papal authority, and established the Roman Republic. The majority of the members of the Directory wanted to continue war actions at any cost, since they understood that their power wouldn't hold even a day after the general peace was announced. The Directory was dominated by its own weakness. In order to exist, it needed a perpetual state of war. In addition to operations in Italy and Switzerland, the government aimed its main efforts at war against Great Britain. It was absolutely clear that William Pitt wouldn't lose time organizing a new coalition. So, the French needed to apply the greatest effort and overcome their most insidious and dangerous enemy as soon as possible. For this goal, they formed a 120,000-strong army at the banks of La Manche, headed by the best general of the Republic, Bonaparte. Initially, the basic plan of the campaign provided for landing in England with the support of the French and allied Spanish fleet. In February 1798, Bonaparte departed from Paris to check the bridgehead of the future operation personally and assess the condition of the fleet. He traveled along the entire coastline from Brest to Dunkirk, and what he saw made him absolutely certain that this operation was impossible. No matter how much effort we make, even in 2 years, we won't achieve superiority at sea. Landing in England without full control of the seas is the boldest and most challenging operation ever undertaken. The right moment for it was lost. In the same report, Bonaparte presented alternative options. He recommended to the Directory that they use the troops concentrated in the north to attempt to push the English out of Hanover or launch a campaign to Egypt, which would jeopardize English trade with India. Bonaparte considered that if neither of these operations were feasible, peace should be pursued with Great Britain. However, the members of the Directory feared peace the most and ultimately chose in favor of the campaign to Egypt. The idea of this campaign had existed for a long time, and Bonaparte was not the first one to officially propose this plan for the government. On July 16, 1797, in the midst of the Italian campaign, a new Minister of Foreign Affairs took office in Paris. It was Talleyrand. Just 2 weeks before his appointment, he had presented a detailed report at the Institute of France on the advantages that could be gained from new colonies in the current circumstances. It was in this report that Talleyrand voiced the plan concerning Egypt. In the autumn of the same year, with the assistance of the French consul in Cairo, Charles Magellan, he presented this plan to the government. However, at that time, against the backdrop of all the victories in Italy, the Directory showed little interest. And now, in February 1798, Bonaparte once again drew the government's attention to this plan. As a result, with active support from Talleyrand, the invasion plan for England was cancelled, and on April 12th, the Directory issued a series of secret decrees regarding the Egyptian campaign. First and foremost, Bonaparte was instructed to seize Malta, as there was information that the English intended to do so. Achieving this goal would provide the French fleet with a significant strategic advantage in the Mediterranean Sea, since Malta was a first-class naval base. After that, he was ordered to capture Egypt and displace the English from the east. this would potentially pose a serious threat to British colonies in India. At that time, Egypt was part of the Ottoman Empire. However, due to the empire's turbulent times, control over Egypt had largely been lost. Although the Ottoman Sultan Selim III remained the ruler of Egypt in name, real political and military power in Egypt was largely held by a special military class that governed Egypt almost independently. These were the Mamluks. These warriors were mostly recruited from the Eurasian steppe. Their leader was Murad Bey, and a total of 12,000 superb horsemen, known for their remarkable courage, were under his command. Thus, the Egyptian campaign had clearly defined goals and could genuinely influence the course of the war with England. It was generally believed that the operation to capture Egypt would take about 6 months. However, besides military reasons, the members of the Directory had political motives regarding this campaign. Bonaparte's presence in Paris posed a threat to the government, perhaps even greater than any coalition. After the triumphant Italian campaign, this unconventional general gained immense popularity in France. He was considered a true leader by the army, and soldiers were willing to follow him anywhere. He also enjoyed great authority among civilians. Upon his return to Paris, Bonaparte was elected a member of the mathematical section of the National Institute of France, the highest scientific institution of the Republic. This rapid rise of Bonaparte greatly alarmed the members of the Directory, and they wished to get rid of him as soon as possible. Give him employment a few thousand miles away, and there will be one less troublemaker at home. Let him do the heavy work, and if he succeeds, so much the better, and if he fails, good riddance. However, oddly enough, Bonaparte also found it advantageous to stay away from France. The greatest danger for him was inactivity. A passive, peaceful life in Paris would cause his fame to fade, and over time he would become just one of the generals among the crowd of unemployed officers. Thus, Bonaparte foresaw the benefits of active absence over passive presence in France, and to the surprise of many, he enthusiastically welcomed the government's approval of the Egyptian expedition. Preparations for the campaign began in March 1798. Speed and secrecy were essential parts of success. To mislead England about the true objectives, fake orders were actively issued, and publications in the press about an impending landing in Ireland were circulated. Also, to confuse the public, and especially the English, the troops gathering in the south of France were referred to as the left wing of the English army, and Bonaparte officially retained command of the English army until his departure. All of this led the English, who were engaged in securing La Manche, to send part of their fleet to the Strait of Gibraltar to block the French exit from the Mediterranean Sea. Meanwhile, Bonaparte was preparing for the campaign very energetically. Continuous work took place for 10 weeks. Everything was conducted with the utmost secrecy, and only a very small number of people knew the campaign's true objectives. The main bases for the concentration of land and sea forces were chosen in Toulon, Marseille, and Genoa. There were 5 such bases in total. The army that was supposed to take part in the Egyptian campaign numbered about 35,000 men and consisted of 5 infantry divisions. Among the divisional commanders were famous Republic generals such as Kleber, Régnier, and Deshayes. Bonaparte also formed additional units to serve as garrisons. The army staff was headed by irreplaceable Berthier. Commander Dumas commanded the cavalry, with Murat and Lassalle under his command. The army consisted mainly of units that had distinguished themselves during the Italian campaign. To transport all these troops, nearly 400 sailing ships of various types were requisitioned and distributed among different ports. The ships were loaded with 100 days of food and 40 days of water. Additionally, 12,000 reserve muskets, 4,000 bottles of wine, large stocks of gunpowder, many artillery shells, tools, and much more were loaded. Bonaparte strictly prohibited taking wives and mistresses along. Only about 300 women from the service staff boarded the ships. However, some officers secretly ignored this prohibition. To accompany this massive naval convoy through the Mediterranean Sea, a squadron of 13 line ships and the same number of frigates were assigned. All naval forces were led by Vice Admiral Bruess, who was considered the Republic's best sailor. The squadron's flagship was the 118-gun battleship Orient. This formidable vessel was the pride of the entire French fleet. But that was not all. A unique feature of this campaign was the large number and high caliber of accompanying civilians. Out of 500 people, no fewer than 167 were renowned scholars, prominent figures in science and literature, and recognized experts in various fields of knowledge. This extensive list included such famous names as Gaspard Monge, Fourier, and Berthollet. The commission also included military Dr. Larrey, artist Denon, geologist Dolomier, and many others. The presence of such a large number of unquestionably distinguished civilians in the army was unprecedented. On May 19, 1798, French ships set sail. The squadron moved at a leisurely pace, maintaining formation. A remarkable atmosphere prevailed on board the ships. Almost every evening, Bonaparte held seminars with scientists where various scientific topics were discussed. However, not everyone found the scientific community interesting. Some officers were dissatisfied with the absence of women, and many soldiers suffered from seasickness. However, the situation for the French was much more dangerous than they thought. 3 days before their departure from Toulon, Admiral Nelson's squadron, consisting of 3 battleships and 2 frigates, entered the Mediterranean Sea. The English found out about the extensive preparations in Toulon, and Nelson was tasked with reconnaissance. By May 19th, Nelson's squadron was already heading for Toulon, but their plans were disrupted by a sudden storm, during which the entire squadron was scattered. Nelson himself narrowly avoided disaster aboard the Vanguard, which lost its mast during the storm. It took 4 days to make repairs, and Nelson wasn't able to approach Toulon until 8 days after his prey had slipped away. Nonetheless, the English became aware that a massive French squadron was in the Mediterranean Sea, and therefore they had an excellent opportunity to strike a devastating blow to the French. On June 7th, Trowbridge's squadron, consisting of 11 line ships, joined Admiral Nelson. Without them, Nelson would have had little chance of stopping Bruess's fleet of 13 battleships. Now, the British and French squadrons were roughly equal in firepower. However, Nelson had the advantage in other parameters. So, after having received reinforcements, Nelson began to cruise along Italy's coast in search of the French. Meanwhile, on June 9th, the French fleet reached the shores of Malta. The sight of 400 ships was a terrifying spectacle for the local population. Malta had never seen such an enormous fleet in its waters. At that time, the Maltese Knights ruled Malta. It was a religious military order founded during the Crusades. Originally, the order was entrusted with the mission of caring for the Holy Land and protecting it. However, the Crusades had long ended, and by the end of the 18th century, the order had lost its reason to exist and was in decline, with the knights themselves already accustomed to living a peaceful and comfortable life. There were a total of 800 knights in Malta, most of whom were French. In addition, there were about 3,000 disorganized and undisciplined militiamen and mercenaries. Nonetheless, Malta's fortifications were so powerful and numerous that even under the current circumstances, the garrison could easily withstand a long siege. The formal pretext for the capture was that the Grand Master had refused to allow more than 4 French ships at a time to enter the main harbor to replenish their drinking water. So, at the dawn of the next day, a landing force disembarked on the island. There were select units from the divisions of Dese and Régnier. They quickly stormed the coastal fortifications, and by 8 a.m., the entire coastal area was in French hands. As expected, the island's defenders didn't wish to fight and demonstrated only symbolic resistance. As a result, on June 12th, aboard the Orient, the Act of Capitulation was signed, which provided for the transfer of all of Malta's forts over to the French troops. The French spent 6 days on Malta. During this time, Bonaparte accomplished a tremendous amount of work. He dictated no fewer than 160 reports, dispatches, and orders, and implemented a multitude of reforms. The entire feudal system on the island was abolished. The Inquisition and slavery in any form were prohibited. All political prisoners on the island were released. The Grand Master and members of the order were expelled from the island, and they were granted substantial pensions in compensation. In addition, a new system of primary and secondary education was established in Malta, the entire economy was restructured, and much more. At the same time, the treasures of the order, amounting to around 7 million francs, were confiscated. Thus, at the cost of the lives of 3 killed soldiers, the French gained an invaluable naval base and a substantial amount of treasures. Bonaparte ordered a garrison of 4,000 soldiers under the command of General Vaubois to be stationed on the island. So on June 19th, exactly 1 month after the French left Toulon, the squadron's flagships signaled departure. Then the French fleet was to proceed to Alexandria without any further stops. In the future, the capture of Malta would lead to serious diplomatic complications with nations that had long dreamed of seizing this strategically important island. Among the French, it sparked an explosion of enthusiasm, and Bonaparte's soldiers eagerly wished to finally reach the city founded by Alexander the Great. However, they didn't even suspect that the fate of the entire squadron hung by a thread at this very moment, because Admiral Nelson had already reached Naples and learned of the whereabouts of the French squadron.